DM material, you know, after I left and everything, because I don't know, I just find that awkward to do. But
He was never the face of the band, yet without him, Depeche Mode may never have reached the heights that defined their legacy. Alan Wilder joined in 1982, quietly stepping into a group that had just lost its founding member. Over the next 13 years, he transformed their sound, layering atmospheres, building arrangements, and pushing the music into darker, more cinematic territory. Fans hailed him as the hidden architect, the perfectionist, who turned songs into masterpieces. And then, in 1995, it all collapsed. Wilder walked away, leaving behind a short, pointed statement that stunned the music world. Why would the man who carried so much of the band's sound suddenly leave at their peak? The truth, revealed slowly over the years, is a story of brilliance, exhaustion, and resentment that nearly tore Depeche Mode apart. In 1981, Depeche Mode was at a crossroads. The band had just broken through with their debut album, Speak and Spell, powered by the catchy single, Just Can't Get Enough. But behind the success, trouble was brewing. Vince Clarke, the group's primary songwriter and driving force, shocked everyone by leaving the band just as their fame was taking off. For many, it looked like Depeche Mode's story might be over before it even began. Enter Alan Wilder. Born in Hammersmith, London, in 1959, Wilder had a background that set him apart from the others. While Martin Gore, Dave Gahan, and Andy Fletcher came from a raw, synth-pop background, Alan was classically trained. He could read music, play multiple instruments, and had already worked as a session musician. When he auditioned for Depeche Mode in 1982, he did not just fit in, he elevated the band. At first, Wilder was considered more of a hired hand than a full member, joining them for the CU tour. But his skills quickly became impossible to ignore. He brought a technical precision and musical discipline that the band had been missing. By the time they released A Broken Frame later that year, Alan was already shaping their sound, adding depth and structure that pointed the band toward darker, more ambitious territory. Fans soon noticed the difference. The early bubblegum pop edges of Speak and Spell gave way to a richer, more textured sound. Songs like Leave in Silence and The Sun and the Rainfall hinted at what Depeche Mode could become with Wilder's influence. While Martin Gore stepped into the role of chief songwriter, it was Alan's arrangements and production sensibilities that gave the tracks their dramatic weight. From the very beginning, it was clear. Alan Wilder was not just filling Vince Clarke's shoes, he was redefining what Depeche Mode could be. And as the 1980s unfolded, his role would only grow, shaping the sound of some of the band's most iconic albums. But with greater influence came greater pressure, and the seeds of future conflict were already being planted. Once Alan Wilder settled into Depeche Mode, the band's music began to transform. He was not just a keyboardist, he was a craftsman, shaping textures, layering sounds, and driving the group toward a darker, more cinematic style that would set them apart from other synth-pop acts of the era. His fingerprints can be heard across Construction Time Again in 1983, where industrial samples and metallic percussion began replacing simple pop melodies. The single, Everything Counts, was not only catchy but also bold, introducing the world to a new version of Depeche Mode, serious, atmospheric, and willing to experiment. Wilder's perfectionism became both his gift and his curse. He would spend endless hours in the studio fine-tuning arrangements, often taking Martin Gore's skeletal demos and building them into sprawling, layered productions. Where Gore brought the songwriting, Wilder brought the architecture. Without him, tracks like Stripped, Never Let Me Down Again, and Enjoy the Silence might never have reached the haunting, powerful scale that turned them into anthems. By the time Black Celebration arrived in 1986, Depeche Mode had fully entered the moody, gothic phase that defined their identity. Wilder's orchestrations gave the songs a brooding grandeur, elevating the band beyond the pop charts and into cult legend status. With Music for the Masses in 1987, his meticulous production helped carry the band to stadiums, culminating in the legendary Pasadena Rose Bowl show in 1988, a moment that confirmed Depeche Mode was no longer a cult act but a global powerhouse. And then came Violator in 1990, widely considered their masterpiece. Alan's role was central. He drove the studio process, pulling the best out of Martin Gore's songwriting and ensuring that Dave Gahan's vocals were wrapped in lush, unforgettable arrangements. Songs like Personal Jesus and Enjoy the Silence became global hits, and fans credited Wilder with turning Depeche Mode into one of the most innovative bands of their generation. But behind the brilliance was a growing problem. Alan's dedication meant he carried much of the workload, while others in the band were less focused in the studio. To Wilder, the imbalance was glaring. He gave everything to the music, yet the spotlight went elsewhere. Gore for the writing, Gahan for the performance. Alan was the architect, but too often he felt invisible. And as the years went on, that sense of being undervalued would begin to wear him down. As Depeche Mode climbed higher, Alan Wilder's perfectionism became both essential and exhausting. In the studio, he often shouldered the burden of transforming Martin Gore's demos into fully realized songs. While Gore provided the raw material, it was Wilder who layered the sounds, arranged the parts, and obsessed over details until the tracks reached their haunting brilliance. But that intensity came at a cost. Alan felt like he was doing the heavy lifting, while others were distracted or disengaged. This imbalance started to eat away at him. Martin Gore's songwriting earned him recognition as the band's creative genius, while Dave Gahan received the glory of being the frontman. Andy Fletcher, who played a more managerial role, rarely contributed musically. Wilder, meanwhile, was stuck in the middle, indispensable in practice, but too often invisible in public. He once admitted that his role was never fully appreciated, a quiet frustration that simmered for years. Personalities clashed as well. Wilder's insistence on precision and discipline contrasted with the looser attitudes of his bandmates. What he saw as necessary professionalism, they sometimes viewed as controlling. The more he pushed for structure, the more resistance he faced, and the divide between them widened. By the late 1980s, tensions had become undeniable. Depeche Mode was achieving global success, selling out arenas and breaking records, but behind the curtain, Wilder was feeling increasingly alienated. He loved the music, but he resented the lack of balance. Recognition was flowing everywhere but in his direction, and that gnawed at him. The turning point would come during the early 90s, when the pressure of fame collided with personal demons inside the band. Drugs, alcohol, and breakdowns created chaos in the studio, and Wilder found himself carrying even more of the weight. What had once been a simmering frustration now threatened to become a breaking point. And with the arrival of songs of faith and devotion, the most turbulent chapter in Depeche Mode's history began. When Depeche Mode began recording songs of faith and devotion in the early 1990s, the band was at the peak of its fame, but also at the edge of collapse. Alan Wilder entered the studio ready to push the music to new heights, but what he found was chaos. Dave Gahan was in the grip of heroin addiction, often missing sessions or arriving unable to perform. Martin Gore was drinking heavily, slipping into destructive habits that left him unreliable. Andy Fletcher battled anxiety and depression, spending long stretches away from the band. Through it all, Alan shouldered the burden. He poured himself into the recording process, building the songs layer by layer, often working alone or with engineers to finish tracks that others could not. His discipline and skill kept the project alive, but the environment was toxic. Wilder later described those sessions as some of the most draining of his life, a cycle of endless work, while his bandmates spiraled. The result, however, was remarkable. Songs of Faith and Devotion, released in 1993, was unlike anything Depeche Mode had done before. Gritty, raw, and infused with gospel, rock, and industrial influences. Tracks like I Feel You and Walking in My Shoes showed the band stretching its limits, and much of that innovation came from Alan's relentless drive. Fans embraced the darker sound, and the album debuted at #1 in both the UK and the United States. But success came at a staggering cost. The accompanying Devotional Tour, later extended into the Exotic Tour, became infamous as one of the most debauched tours in rock history. Night after night, the band descended deeper into excess. Gahan's drug use intensified, Gore's drinking worsened, and Fletcher suffered a breakdown that forced him off the road for weeks. Wilder, meanwhile, kept performing with precision, but inside he was exhausted. isolated, and increasingly bitter. To the public, Depeche Mode looked unstoppable, an electronic band that had conquered stadiums and reinvented itself again. But for Alan, the experience confirmed what he had feared. He was carrying too much of the weight, and no one seemed to notice. By the time the tour ended in 1994, Wilder was drained to his core. The cracks that had been building for years had finally become too wide to ignore. The question was no longer whether he could keep going, but how long he could last before walking away for good. By the end of the Songs of Faith and Devotion tour in 1994, Alan Wilder was exhausted beyond repair. For 2 years, he had lived in the middle of what he later described as a traveling circus of chaos. Dave Gahan was spiraling deeper into addiction, often needing medical attention just to make it through shows. Martin Gore was drinking heavily, disappearing into binges that left him unreliable. Andy Fletcher had withdrawn for long stretches due to depression. And yet the band still filled arenas, still projected an image of unstoppable power. Behind the curtain, Alan felt more alone than ever. He was rehearsing, performing, and keeping the music tight, while others unraveled. But instead of gratitude, he sensed indifference. In interviews after leaving, he admitted that what cut deepest was not just the imbalance of work, but the lack of recognition. He could not shake the feeling that his effort and discipline were invisible, overshadowed by the chaos that made headlines. The Devotional and Exotic tours were later called the most debauched tours in rock history, and for Alan, they were the final straw. Night after night of keeping the show together while others partied or self-destructed left him drained. He had always been the perfectionist, the architect, the one who made sure the music worked. But by 1995, he no longer wanted to play that role. In June of that year, Wilder released a short but pointed statement announcing his departure from Depeche Mode. In it, he explained that his role within the band, both musically and in decision-making, was never fully appreciated. It was a quiet but devastating exit, confirming what many fans had long suspected. Alan Wilder was the unsung hero, and he was walking away. The reaction from fans was immediate. Letters poured in, forums buzzed, and debates raged. Many believed Depeche Mode could not survive without him, that his precision and vision had been the backbone of their greatest years. To them, his exit felt like the end of an era. For Alan, the decision was painful but necessary. He was not leaving because he stopped caring. He was leaving because he cared too much, and it was tearing him apart. What came next would be just as telling. Alan breaking his silence to explain why he left, and how his time in Depeche Mode had truly felt from the inside. When Alan Wilder left Depeche Mode in June 1995, his official statement was polite but firm. He thanked the fans, expressed pride in the band's achievements, and wished them success. But tucked inside was the line that revealed everything. His role within the band, both musically and in decision-making, was never fully appreciated. For someone usually quiet and reserved, it was as close to a rebuke as Alan had ever made. Over time, he expanded on those words. In interviews, he admitted that his years in the band left him drained, not only by the relentless workload, but also by the lack of recognition. He felt that Martin Gore, as songwriter, and Dave Gahan, as frontman, received nearly all the credit. Andy Fletcher, meanwhile, handled business, but contributed little musically. Wilder, who had spent countless hours shaping arrangements and producing the band's most iconic albums, often felt invisible. He described his years with Depeche Mode as a roller coaster of brilliance and frustration. On one hand, he was proud of the music they created together, especially albums like Black Celebration, Violator, and Songs of Faith and Devotion. On the other, he could not ignore how undervalued he felt. Even when the band was imploding during the Devotional Tour, Wilder said he was treated more like an employee than a partner. Fans rallied to his side. Many called him the unsung hero of Depeche Mode, the perfectionist who turned Martin Gore's demos into the atmospheric, towering soundscapes that defined their legacy. Wilder himself never bragged, but he admitted he was touched by how many listeners recognized his contributions after he left. For years, fan forums and interviews echoed the same sentiment. Depeche Mode's sound had never been the same without him. And yet, Wilder made it clear he did not harbor bitterness. He explained that leaving was the healthiest decision he could have made at the time. Remaining in the band, he believed, would have consumed him. He wanted creative freedom, space to breathe, and a chance to explore music without the dysfunction that had defined his final years in Depeche Mode. In stepping away, he closed one chapter, but he was far from finished. Because Alan Wilder was not done making music. His next move would prove just how deeply his artistry ran, even outside the band that made him famous. When Alan Wilder walked away from Depeche Mode in 1995, many assumed he might vanish from the music scene. Instead, he poured his energy into a project he had quietly nurtured, even during his DM years: Recoil. Unlike the structured demands of Depeche Mode, Recoil gave Wilder complete freedom. It was not a traditional band, but a studio project where he could experiment with soundscapes, collaborations, and concepts without compromise. Recoil albums like Unsound Methods, 1997, and Liquid, 2000, revealed just how adventurous Wilder could be when left to his own devices. They were darker, more experimental, weaving together spoken word, guest vocalists, and ambient textures. Though they never achieved mainstream success, Recoil developed a loyal cult following. For fans who admired Alan's perfectionism in Depeche Mode, these records felt like an unfiltered glimpse into his creative mind. Beyond Recoil, Wilder occasionally re-emerged in surprising ways. He contributed remixes for artists including Depeche Mode themselves, Nitzer Ebb, and Curve. Each time, his touch was unmistakable, precise, layered, and cinematic. Though he was no longer part of Depeche Mode, his shadow lingered over their work. The most emotional moment came in 2010, when Wilder appeared on stage with Depeche Mode during a show at London's Royal Albert Hall. The reunion was brief, just one performance of Somebody alongside Martin Gore, but the crowd erupted. For fans, it was a once-in-a-lifetime moment, a reminder of the bond that had once created magic. Wilder later admitted it was moving to reconnect, though he made clear it was not a permanent return. In interviews, he spoke with a calm honesty about life after the band. He had no regrets about leaving, he said, because it gave him freedom and peace of mind. But he also acknowledged that Depeche Mode would always be part of him. "It's in my blood," he once remarked. "You don't just switch it off." Still, Alan's post-DM years cemented a truth. He was not simply a former member of a famous band. He was an artist in his own right, unafraid to follow his vision, even if it meant walking away from fame. But the question lingered: had Depeche Mode lost something essential when Alan left? For many fans, the answer was yes, and his legacy within the band continues to spark debate even today. Even decades after his departure, Alan Wilder's influence on Depeche Mode remains a point of passionate debate. To many fans, the band's finest era, Black Celebration, Violator, Songs of Faith, and Devotion, was inseparable from his fingerprints. His perfectionism gave Depeche Mode its sonic depth, transforming Martin Gore's demos into fully realized anthems and elevating the band from synth-pop pioneers to global icons. The band continued without him, of course, achieving commercial success with albums like Ultra and Spirit. But longtime listeners often argue that something was missing: the precision, the textures, the cinematic weight that Wilder had brought. Others insist that while Depeche Mode adapted and evolved, Wilder's departure marked the end of their boldest, most innovative years. For Alan himself, the legacy seems more complicated. He has acknowledged the pride he feels for the work he did with Depeche Mode, while also standing by his decision to leave. His later interviews reveal no bitterness, only the honesty of a man who gave everything he had and walked away when it became too much. Fans see him as the hidden architect, the unsung hero who made the music soar even when the band itself was in turmoil. In the end, Alan Wilder's story is both a cautionary tale and a celebration. It shows how genius can thrive in the shadows, how perfection can carry both brilliance and burden, and how sometimes the greatest contributions are only fully recognized after someone is gone. Alan Wilder's journey with Depeche Mode is more than just a story about a band member leaving. It is about the price of brilliance, the weight of perfection, and the silence that often surrounds the unsung hero. His years of work shaped the band's legacy, yet his departure proved that even in success, recognition does not always follow effort. To this day, fans continue to ask what Depeche Mode might have been if Alan had stayed, and whether their greatest chapter ended the moment he walked away. Thank you for watching. If you want more stories like this, deep looks into the hidden truths of music history, make sure to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you never miss the next one.